Today, we are blessed to have a special guest on the 40 Days of Reconciliation podcast, Mr. Steve Ward, who is the founder and executive director of Steps Ministries, a non-profit ministry with the goals of helping people improve their lives, grow closer to God, and prevent addiction. You're welcome, Mr. Steve.
Thank you so much, Manuel, for having me. It is a blessing and an honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to it.
You founded Steps Ministries. Would you like to tell us what this is in full and what exactly you do?
So later I can get into how and why we founded it if you'd like, but let me tell you just a little bit about what Steps is. We're somewhat of a unique ministry. We've been in operation for 8 years. We provide resources that can be online resources such as courses or videos or podcasts or articles, but also digital resources that we push out. We're on social media with Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and others. We produce resources to try to help people, as you mentioned before, improve their lives, grow closer to God, and prevent addiction. My history with substance abuse and recovery and 15 years of research since then have kind of shown that those three things are intertwined. Sometimes people have crises that come into their life. It might be a mental health issue such as depression or anxiety or loneliness or hopelessness. Or it could be some form of an addiction. It could be alcohol or some form of drug or even a behavior that's addictive in nature. And very often people wind up in these traps and then aren't quite sure what to do, and their lives and their families are disrupted. So sometimes we'll encourage them to go through a recovery process to try to get better. Well, my family was exposed to a lot of those issues and a lot of recovery, and I thought rather than waiting until people's lives crash and become a disaster in a sense, why don't we help people learn how to live life effectively earlier? And the way you do that is there are practical steps we can take so that emotionally and spiritually and mentally we're living life effectively. And guess what? Those align with God's principles, right? I mean, God designed us. He designed the world. And He actually has a lot of suggestions about how we can live life effectively. So when we follow those steps, we'll be happier in the short term. We'll be pleasing God in the process. And also in the long term, it will tend to help us prevent serious issues from tearing our lives apart.
Wow, thank you so much for this work that you're doing. Would you like to share with us one addiction case you have handled and how easy it was handling it?
Yeah. One is I don't think I would ever describe dealing with addiction as easy, but I'll explain. In other words, addictions tend to be a very powerful influence on our lives, right? We normally develop them over a period of time. They generally don't show up very quickly. We develop them over a period of time. And the definition of an addiction is a compulsive habit that we repeat over and over again that has negative consequences, but we find it hard to stop. Again, common addictions are alcohol or drugs of various sorts. But again, I mentioned we can be addicted to a behavior. There are people who are addicted to pornography or gambling. Or even you can be addicted to a behavior such as anger or control or people pleasing. But we work with individuals, we work with parents, we work with teenagers, and we also help equip organizations. Kind of a classic situation, I think, where you see a lot of it is we do a lot of work with parents. When I was 9 years ago, I was moving out of the business world and deciding to found this new ministry called Steps. The youth pastor of our church came to see me, and he said, Steve, I kind of know the direction your ministry is going to go on, right? I mean, based on your family's experiences, you now feel called to help people prevent those problems from happening in their lives. He said, but what I really implore you to do is that you also do some work for parents. He said, in the local school, let me tell you what the normal situation is like. When kids become teenagers, their lives are changing, and they often have anxiety. They feel left out of the group. They want to fit in. They're under a lot of pressure. And these days, I'll certainly address the United States, right? It's true in a lot of parts of the country, but certainly in the United States, drugs and alcohol are relatively easy to get, either legally or illegally. You can get them from friends, you can get them over the internet, or in some cases you can go into a store and buy it. So a lot of teenagers struggle. In fact, 3 out of 4 teenagers will use some form of an an addictive substance, that doesn't mean they will become addicted, but they will try it. And so what my youth pastor said to me is in our local school, a lot of these kids are drinking alcohol and a lot of them are smoking marijuana because that's just become accepted. It's almost, there's so many kids who do it that they don't even think it's that big a deal anymore. He said, but the problem is very often they go from those substances to something worse, such as opioid-based pills, or maybe from there even to something as bad as heroin or something along those lines. He said, and then their lives absolutely come apart. He said, so that's happening to a significant fraction of our kids, not the majority, but a significant fraction of them. And he said, now look at the parents. This is all new to the parents, right? And most parents are already busy raising a family and keeping down a job. Said, but most parents one is they don't know what to do in those situations, right? It's new to them. They don't know what to do. The other is they're, frankly, kind of embarrassed or ashamed about it. So they're almost afraid a little bit to let their friends or other people know what's going on because it makes them look like their family's not in great shape. So they get embarrassed or ashamed about it. So they don't know what to do. They're embarrassed or ashamed. So what do? They keep things to themselves. They hope it's just a phase their kids go through, and they don't do anything specific about it. Well, that's not the right way to approach it. You really have to be proactive and thoughtful in dealing with it. So, but if we take those parents and just say, hey, here are some reasonable things you can do, just as part of your parenting. We have a process called PACES. That's PACES. And each of those letters stands for a concept and a step. The P is for preparation. That's right. So for parents, we say, if your kids are, becoming a teenager, if they are now or they will be soon, you need to be prepared for that stage, right? We talk about the challenges their kids are going to be facing, that their kids are going to be changing. So parents need to be prepared that the teenage years are different than the earlier years. The A in PACES is for awareness, which says, one is you need to be very aware of what your kids are being exposed to. Are they being put in positions which are tempting to them? For example, do they have friends who use drugs or who drink alcohol? Or are they going to parties or situations where they'll be exposed to that? But also be aware of what's going on inside of your son or daughter. Now, do they have anxiety? Are they depressed? Do they feel left out? Do they feel alone or even hopeless? So that's what the second step on awareness is about. The third step is the C in PACES. It's called connection. Very often when our kids are young, it's natural for the way that parents interrelate with them. It's fun, right? But as they become teenagers, they're forming their own personality. They tend to separate themselves to a greater degree from their parents, and it becomes harder to stay connected to kids when they're teenagers. And a lot of that is very natural. But that means parents need to be more thoughtful about it, right? You need to move from you need to handle a teenager differently than you handle, a young child, right? You can't just, in an autocratic way, order them around and tell them what to do and what's right and wrong. You want to be more empathetic. You want to try to connect with them what's going on. You want to listen a lot more. And in some cases, yell, preach, or scold less. You really want to know what their world is going on and connect with them there. That's kind of what connection is about. The fourth of the 5 steps is the E in PACES. It's for education, which is because your kids are going through something new and you're being presented with different situations, you probably need to pause and go and maybe get online resources like Steps provides to get educated on what do you do if your son or daughter is early in the stages of using drugs, or what do you do if you can't connect them with him more. So you get educated. And then the final step, the S in PACES, the S is for steps, which means you need to have some kind of a plan. It's complicated, but it's before your son or daughter gets into trouble, do you have a plan that shows the steps you want to be taking as a parent to walk with them through life? So that's a process called PACES, which we call PACES for parents. And I know that's a long way, but I was trying to answer a lot of your questions in one story to say, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of parents, and every situation is different, but they also face a lot of commonalities. And that road that their teenagers go down has a lot of similarities to it. It starts by their son or daughter has something that is hurting them inside, or they're exposed to a temptation, or there's something they're yearning for. In other words, there's a need in their life. And maybe spiritually they're not at a point where they immediately turn to God on it. They turn to something else, right? And an addictive substance or an addictive behavior makes them feel better for a little while. And if their friends are doing it, it helps them fit in. So they feel better for a little while, and so they keep doing it. And then at some point, they can't stop. So those steps of progression that teenagers go through are not unlike the steps of progression an adult goes through. And the main message I'm trying to send is you don't have to be a recovery expert or a counselor or a therapist to help someone or even to help yourself. We call our parenting approach proactive parenting, which just means you need to be proactive and intentional about it. You need to be more aware. You need to be getting educated and work at your connections. So we urge parents in this case, but also individuals to be more thoughtful about how they're going through each day and how they're coping with life's problems so that they make good choices rather than bad choices. Like I said, there have been hundreds of parents who've been at various stages of that story I just told. So those cases are very typical.
How do you identify cases that need your attention?
That's a good question. I'll say two ways. One is Steps is sort of unique, right, in that we aren't what I call a recovery organization or a treatment organization, right? We don't have a facility where we bring people in and help them deal with drug abuse, as an example. In fact, we're not even primarily attempting to be a coaching organization, right? What we're trying to do is to prepare resources that help other people before problems occur. So the audiences we try to reach are parents of teenagers or preteens, right? Because by definition, the teenage years create a higher degree of risk. So we proactively try to reach out to parents of teenagers and preteens. We also have some resources that if there's an organization, say if your church or your community group has a youth group for teenagers, we have resources where you can work with those teenagers to help them develop life skills so that spiritually and emotionally and mentally and socially, they just learn how to live life the right way. So that's a second audience, right? I said parents of teenagers themselves. And the third is individuals who are already in pain to some degree, or those that are around them, but maybe it hasn't become a crisis yet. So those are really, I think, the big audiences. And we try to reach people proactively ahead of time and help educate and inform a lot of people so that some of them will take advantage of that and then not go down that road, rather than picking individually who is it that's already struggling. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Do parents look for you or you look for them?
Both. In other words, they can look for us. For example, any parent can go to our website, which is lifeimprovementsteps.com, lifeimprovementsteps.com. And on the top menu or on the main homepage, they'll see, hey, I can click on this box and learn more about parenting. And they'll actually see 10 easy to use online courses there that are parenting young kids, parenting teenagers, parenting in a crisis, biblical parenting, grandparenting, so parents can find us. We also seek to find them we're on social media. For example, Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. We're on a couple other channels as well, but those are probably the biggest. So we try to reach, in this case, parents and other individuals where they are. And the third thing we do is we try to support other organizations, right? If there is an organization that deals with parents and families and youth, or if there is an organization that is either a mentoring or a coaching organization that helps people live life better, we're glad to share our resources with them to help them help the people they serve. So I think those are the three ways. One is people find us on our website. The other is we reach out to them digitally through social media and other means. And the third is we work through organizations which are helping people and equip those organizations.
Listening to you, there are so many insights that listeners are going to get, but also there is a lot more from your website, which you've already mentioned. And one thing that really was impressive is teaching parents not to be authoritative, but rather learning from your teaching how they should relate with their children so they can improve their influence. And I wanted to ask you, how do you connect with institutions that have greater influence with the youth, the young people? Like, I mean, maybe the churches, do the local police, the institutions link with you? Then the final question is on that, is how are you operating physically only in the United States and the rest of the world is connected online? How do you work globally?
Yeah. I'll answer the last one first and then go to the other one. Physically, we only operate, I would even say, probably mostly in the state of Alabama, which is southeastern United States, because that's several hundred miles in any direction, so there's only so far we can go. So in terms of doing a class or teaching or speaking in person, we tend to operate in that area. But the good news about the internet, right? So our online resources and digital resources we send out can help anybody, right? Anyone, anywhere in the world, right? Anyone who has access to the internet, right, we can serve. So that's the answer to where do we operate. In terms of reaching youth directly, my answer there is a little bit different than what I gave to parents, because our primary way to reach youth is to try to help and equip organizations that are already helping youth. For example, a lot of churches will have a youth group of their teenagers who get together, and maybe there is an elder or a youth pastor who looks after them. Or sometimes there's a community organization that gets teenagers together. Or in some cases, there are people who like to mentor teenagers. So those organizations which are trying to help teenagers, in those cases, we would supply our resources to them. And they can use them in a classroom type environment, or they can use it in a small group, or they can even use them in a kind of a one-on-one mentoring environment. So we actually are not trying to do much to reach teenagers directly, but in those cases, we try to help organizations that are helping teenagers.
Yes, perhaps at this point, do you have one praise incidents that you know really this worked effectively that you could share with us?
Well, the one that's easiest and closest home to me is frankly to talk about my own family. My wife and I have 2 sons, and 3 of the 4 of us struggled with substance abuse and some form of mental health issues over the years, right? I was an alcoholic for many years. My wife struggled with alcohol. And our older son, when he became a teenager, got into both drugs and alcohol because of the people he was hanging around. So at times for our family, it was very dark for us. It was hard. But now it led me to change my life and leave the business world and start a nonprofit ministry. So it sent me in a whole new direction, because I got so excited about the fact that recovery actually works. And you can not only treat some of these issues, in many cases you can prevent them. And that God is so omniscient, right, that he knows, he designed us, right? So he knows what is best for us to live. And that if we follow his guidance and live right on a day-to-day basis, we'll tend to avoid those things. So every day I feel blessed and thankful for that. I think my wife would say the same, right? There was a time when our boys got old enough to leave the home, when sometimes for moms that can become a period where they may face some depression, right? Because their sense of purpose has been their kids for a while. And if the kids are gone, it's hard to find it. So she went into a period of depression, and she used alcohol to feel better for a while. But now she's a joyful person who's very engaged in recovery and in helping other women. And then I'll close with what is so exciting to me is our older son. For 10 years, he struggled, and it was very, very hard. There were times when we didn't know what was going to happen with him. But for about the last 8 years or so, he's been doing great. And he is now working and being extremely productive and has a great job. He got married about 3 years ago, and a year ago, he gave us our first grandchild. And so he's a wonderful dad and a wonderful son, and he and I will have this conversation before. And I would want anyone who's listening who may be struggling to listen to this. I'll say to my son, I say, son, you have now become the man that God created you to be, not just in spite of the problems you faced, but in many cases because of them. In other words, God in his wisdom can use what seem to us to be our deepest trials to shape us in ways that can be absolutely transformational in nature. So for anyone who's struggling, or if you're close to someone who does, I hope that you'll know these few things. One is, it's okay not to be okay, but you don't have to stay that way. If you have depression or anxiety or an addiction, you may feel a sense of shame. And that may tend to make you feel so bad that you want to continue your habit, and you don't reach out for help because you're embarrassed about it. Millions and millions of people are struggling these days. You're not that unusual. Everybody's struggling, but they just hide it from others. So it's okay that you're not okay, right? God knows right where you are. but you don't have to stay that way. And there are steps you can take to move in the right direction. I also want to encourage you that even though your situation may seem desperate, there are millions of people who have been right where you are. Not the exact same circumstances, but the same types of problems. And millions of them have gotten better. And the third thing I'll say is you can have hope, right? You can have a realistic assurance of a positive future because there are things you can do to move in the right direction. Other people have done it. And God knows exactly where you are. He will be with you every step of the way. And he will walk with you, as you learn, day by day, step by step, to deal with those issues and learn to live life better. So for those people who are struggling, or someone who is, life can get better. There's nothing magic about it that we can do, right? God is supernatural. God can do what he wants to do. But normally it will take a period of time to work our way through these problems. But if you hang in there and persevere and keep taking small steps in the right direction, life can get better. And when it does, you'll look back and it will become just a sense of thankfulness for you. That through God's grace, you've gone through that. And you'll also find that you're now a different person. That you're more humble and caring and compassionate of others because of what you've been through. So I hope that's encouraging and giving hope to anyone who's struggling.
Very much. And as we come to the conclusion of this podcast, once more, kindly, where do we find these resources? I know you've already done that, but if you don't mind, just please, once more.
Yeah, I'm glad. Everybody wants to take steps to improve their life, right? So just remember, lifeimprovementsteps.com. It's all together. So it's lifeimprovementsteps.com. lifeimprovementsteps.com.
It's been a pleasure hosting you on the 40 Days of Reconciliation podcast. Thank you so much, Mr. Steve Ward.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.